Hey builders, before we begin today's episode, I just want to make sure that you are signed up for our masterclass. It's happening tomorrow, Thursday, September 11th, 7 p.m., and it's all about feedback and how to give teachers effective feedback. We're talking about the four feedback conversations, the only four feedback conversations you ever need. So you're going to learn how to give teachers differentiated feedback based on where they are so they can actually hear it and implement it. You're going to get the feedback frameworks. I'm going to show you before and after so you can see the difference that this feedback can make. So you'll know what it sounds like. You're going to get tons of examples and you're going to get the four feedback conversational frameworks so you can use them immediately in your very next feedback conversation. Plus, there'll be time for questions and answers so that you can bring your feedback challenges to the masterclass and get some support. And you will get access to the recording for 2 weeks after the masterclass. So you can revisit it, or if you can't show up live, you can watch it and take notes. You're going to get all the tools. Oh, it's incredible. But it's happening tomorrow. So if you have not signed up for this masterclass, then you need to go to buildershipuniversity.com/masterclass. buildershipuniversity.com/masterclass and make sure you sign up. We're going live tomorrow, Thursday, September 11th, 7 p.m. And I hope to see you there. Now, on with the show. You're listening to the School Leadership Reimagined podcast, episode 329. How do builders like us make a dramatic difference in the lives of our students in spite of all the obstacles we face? How do you keep your vision for your school from being held hostage by resistant teachers, uncooperative parents, ridiculous district policies, or a lack of time, money, or resources? If you're facing those challenges right now, here's where you'll find the answers, strategies, and actionable tips you need to overcome any obstacle you face. You don't have to wait to make a difference in the lives of the people you serve. You can turn your school into a success story right now with the people and resources you already have. Let's get started. Hey builders, welcome to another episode of the School Leadership Reimagined podcast. I'm your host, Robyn Jackson, and today I have cleverly entitled this episode, The Feedback Habits That Hurt and the Myths That Make Them Seem Like a Good Idea. And what I'm going to do in this episode is I'm going to do some myth busting. There are 7 big feedback myths that we were all taught to believe, we were trained to believe, and those myths are underlying how we give feedback to teachers, and they are hurting us. They are making those feedback conversations arduous for both us and for the teacher. They are resulting in a lot of pushback and hurt feelings and blank stares. The biggest challenge is that they're not making a difference. They're not helping teachers improve their practice. And so we got a lot to cover today, but hopefully by the end of this episode, you will see that a lot of the ways that we were trained to give feedback are really setting us up. And once you understand that, then you can start to choose to give feedback differently in a way that actually honors the teacher in front of you, in a way that actually helps the teacher move towards 100% of the students in their classroom being successful, and in a way that also positions you as a partner in that process rather than as somebody who is just, I was looking for a P word right there. So I could, a partner rather than a proctor, and, to be clever, but really just putting you in a position of being a boss hole. That's the best I can do, a boss hole. So let's get started. The first myth, and you've heard me talk about this before, is this idea that our feedback needs to have a compliment. We feel like we have to always find something good to say about the classroom. And so what we do then, because we believe this myth, we've created these structures that are awful, right? So, how I feel about a glow and grow sandwich. And recently somebody told me that they don't have glows and grows in their district. They use, what was it? It was a star and a stare. I don't even know what that is. Or though I've heard wows and wonderings. They all mean the same thing. They all manufacture this structure that forces you to pay the teacher a compliment before you can get to the feedback that you really want to give. And what it does is it sets you up as being inauthentic. right? So if every single time, okay, here's your glow and here's your grow, and especially if I'm reaching for a glow, or in some cases, we have plenty of glows and we're reaching for a grow, that structure forces us to say things we don't mean. And so, how can somebody trust my feedback when they know that I'm being inauthentic? How can somebody trust my feedback when I'm giving equal weight to a glow and a grow? I may be in a classroom and it is extraordinary. And there's just one little tweak the teacher has to make. But when I use the glow and grow format or star and stare format or whatever, I'm putting them on equal footing. All the wonderful things in your classroom and the one tweak. Let's say that I'm in a classroom where it needs some work. There's some serious concerns there. I put my tepid glow on the same footing as my very important grow. So when you are forcing yourself to pay teachers compliments, paying somebody a compliment is not feedback. Paying somebody a compliment is appeasement. And so what we need to be doing is, instead of worrying about complimenting teachers, pay teachers the compliment of telling them the truth. Pay teachers the compliment of treating them like professionals. Pay teachers the compliment of treating them with respect. All those quote unquote glows and compliments that we're giving teachers are disrespectful. They're inauthentic. They are manipulative, and they don't move practice forward. All right, I'm off my soapbox on that one. Let's go to myth number 2. Myth number 2 is this idea that if we ask them enough questions, if we structure questions the exact right way, that they will arrive at the answers themselves. Listen, I get why we have this myth, because for so many years, people were subjected to performance reviews and feedback, quote unquote, feedback conversations where somebody else was telling you what to do. But we've overcorrected. So now the feedback conversations are so full of questions that it puts the teacher in a very defensive posture, right? So the habits that we've developed based on this myth is that we ask a lot of open-ended questions like, what do you think well? Or how might you have done that differently? Even when the teacher is clearly struggling. And so we are taught you got to hold up a mirror to the teacher's practice, and the teacher will then be able to figure it out on their own. But if a teacher is drowning, why are we holding up a mirror to them? I'll give you an example. I went into a classroom one time, and this teacher was going over the homework, and she's a good teacher. She really was. It's just, she did this thing, and it just, I was like, oh, I was flabbergasted. So she's going over the homework, and she's talking to the kids, and the kids are not understanding something. And she keeps asking them questions to try to get them to come to the answer by themselves. And after about 10 minutes, the kids are getting frustrated. The kids are sitting there trying to guess what's on her mind. And her questions become less and less thoughtful and reflective, because she's so committed to the strategy at that point that she doesn't know how to kind of work her way out of it. So the kids, she's saying, so, how might this be? And then she ends up asking a question or she ends up telling the students, all right, I'll give you a hint. Would you like a hint? Now, at that point, if you feel like you have to hint, you've lost the process. And the kids are like, yes. And she goes, it starts with the letter M. I mean, so of course I gave her feedback about that, but we do the same thing in feedback conversations. How might you have gotten students more engaged at the very beginning? How might you have avoided the 10 minutes of confusion that happened during transition time? What you do is you're not helping the teacher be reflective. What you're really doing is you are playing a giant game of guess what's on my mind. Try to guess the right answer. And the teacher's so busy trying to guess the right answer that they're no longer being reflective. Questions are great when used correctly, but we are not using them correctly. We are just asking random reflective questions and hoping that teachers get it on their own, and instead of matching the questions to where the teacher is right now. Now, you've heard me talk about the masterclass that's coming up this week, tomorrow, if you're listening to this in real time. And we're going to talk about how to do that. There is a way to ask questions that creates true reflection, but you have to match the questions to the teacher in front of you. And if you don't know how to do that, if you're just asking questions because they're part of a script, you're just going to frustrate the teacher and just go round and round and round in circles. And you're going to actually shut off reflection rather than create it. All right. Myth number 3 you need to get into X number of classrooms a week. So this is pervasive, right? Because for years, administrators weren't getting into classrooms enough. And so now districts are prescribing it. You have to get into 10 classrooms this week, or you have to get into 3 classrooms a day. Gurus are promoting it and telling you, you got to get into X number of classrooms for the year. So we do these weird walkthroughs, right? So we believe we have to get in more classrooms. So we do these walkthroughs, and the walkthroughs are not feedback. They're more about compliance. You're complying because you feel like you have to get into classrooms, and then the teachers are submitting to them because they feel like they have to comply with this random drive-by feedback that the walkthroughs often create. So we spend all this time creating these walkthrough instruments, and we have 4 or 5 different focus areas. And then after we go and visit a classroom, we say we have to stay in the classroom for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it is. And then afterwards, we need to send the teacher feedback within 24 hours of visiting their classroom. And then we give these teachers this random feedback that's very formulaic, and feedback becomes an exercise in compliance. And sure, we are showing up, but are we making a difference? Probably not. In fact, we're making a nuisance of ourselves, right? Now, I believe in walkthroughs. Those of you who are inside the collective, you know there's a whole walkthrough playbook on how to do walkthroughs the right way, walkthroughs in a way that actually moves the school forward and changes your culture. We've got toolkits in there around that. But if you just walk through, and your walkthroughs are really about you wandering around, and your walkthroughs are really about you just randomly showing up into classrooms because you have to meet your classroom quota, and then randomly spewing quote unquote feedback at a teacher based on your checklist or your walkthrough protocol or whatever it is, and you're not actually targeting feedback to the teacher where the teacher needs it and how the teacher needs it, then your walkthrough is creating a culture of inspection, not improvement. Your walkthrough is creating a culture where your teachers kind of just ignore your feedback because you're just showing up and giving them random feedback. We think that, giving more feedback actually is better. But there is research out there that says that giving more feedback doesn't actually lead to improvement. Rather than randomly showing up into classrooms because you got to get your 10 classrooms in that week, you need to have a system for which classrooms need you. You need to show up at the right time. And a lot of times we're so busy trying to get the numbers in so that we don't get pushback from our supervisors in our district that we're not thinking strategically about what classrooms need you to be there and what kind of feedback they need from you in those walkthrough moments. And so this myth is creating a lot of extra busy work, and it's diluting the feedback that we do give teachers, and it's not diluting the feedback, it's diluting the power of the feedback that we do give teachers. So teachers are getting more feedback than ever, and that feedback is less useful than it has ever been because after a while, I can ignore your feedback, right? It just feels like background chatter. All right. Oh, they're here again. Oh, and here's another random glow and grow on a form that I got in writing within 24 hours of their visit. And it just goes into the file, and I keep teaching the way I need to teach out of survival because you really, how do I have a chance to improve when you're just coming in and giving me random feedback? You need to be matching feedback to the teacher's need. That's one of the reasons why we're doing a masterclass this week, is because even if your district requires you to just do these walkthroughs and these random things, there's a way to be able to take that district requirement and give teachers feedback that actually means something, so that instead of just being a compliance exercise that you're both going through and enduring, instead of it being just a drag on your schedule and an annoyance to the teachers when you randomly show up with your checklist, we can take this district requirement and turn it into something that allows for teachers to get meaningful feedback on a regular basis. All right. Now we are on myth number 4. Myth number 4 is about the fact that A lot of us believe we need a script, that there is a perfect script out there, that if we just use the script, we can avoid conflict. If we just use the script, we can keep things safe. So what it has led to, it's a habit of using very robotic and overly formulaic and formal language and a neutral stance. And so the conversation is no longer conversation we'd find in the wild. It is no longer a conversation that feels natural and authentic. It's a feedback dance. And you've got a script, and whether you believe it or not, the teachers also have a script. The district didn't hand it out, but savvy teachers recognize what they need to say in a feedback conversation in order to get out alive. And so they are also operating by a script. So no one on either side of the table is being authentic. And because no one's being authentic, you're creating distance instead of trust. And you're creating a greater gap between what happens in your office during that conversation and seeing it implemented in the classroom with authenticity as well as with fidelity. So what we should be doing instead is using real language that creates connection. One of the reasons why we don't give scripts out, and when we talk about the 4 feedback conversations in the upcoming masterclass, when you're not going to get a script. What you will get is a framework, a structure. And the structure allows you to have the conversation in language that is natural. So I remember when we first created these frameworks, people were using them. They were having them sitting on the desk, and unlike a script where they're reading a script and, okay, now time for asking a reflective question. Make sure that you put "I wonder about" in front of your question, and all of a sudden that's supposedly magically make it reflective. Don't get me started. But instead, with the framework on the desk, they could keep the conversation headed in the right direction while having a genuine conversation and the framework allows for back and forth. It's not something you're just reading to the teacher and then the teacher says their lines and you're doing a script read rather than having a real conversation. Having a framework in front of you keeps you from veering off into directions that are not productive while still allowing you to have a conversation that is authentic and genuine and real. The framework allows you to focus on the person instead of what's my next line. The framework allows for moments of genuine conversation rather than for a script exchange. So you don't need a script to stay safe. You don't need magic words. There aren't anything. What you need to do is show up as yourself, but have the structure of the framework to give you the freedom to be yourself. Okay. All right. Myth number 5, all feedback should be coaching. Oh my goodness. This one is so pervasive right now. We feel like every time we have a feedback conversation, we should be coaching people. Coaching is just one kind of feedback conversation, but we think that's the only one that matters. So what happens is we've created some really bad habits of, always figuring out, like feeling like we have to give the teacher advice on what to do next, always figuring out how we have to, some way to help the teacher improve in our feedback conversation. And so our feedback conversations, sometimes they're not, a teacher is not ready for coaching. And so they're frustrating because we come in wanting to coach, thinking that's what makes good feedback, when sometimes the teacher isn't ready to hear it. And sometimes the teacher isn't even ready to implement it. Then we get frustrated because I told them what to do and they didn't do it. Well, you know what? Maybe that wasn't the right conversation for that moment. Maybe they can't understand how to do something unless you help them first see why it's important. And you just went straight to coaching. There are all kinds of feedback conversations. I'm going to show you the 4 big ones, the only 4 you really need in the masterclass. But coaching isn't for everybody, right? We need to be giving teachers feedback that's differentiated. Have you ever worked with a group of students who are struggling in something, and then you're sitting there coaching them and trying to help them come, and they get frustrated and just throw everything off their desk? If you were observing a teacher doing that, you'd be giving that teacher different advice. You'd be saying, listen, at that point, that student didn't need coaching. What they needed was for you to go in and give them a scaffold to help them to get through the work before you started coaching them. And sometimes a student is doing a great job and you're sitting down there and because you feel like you have to justify yourself. And so we're, the teacher has said student, but the teacher's doing a great job. And so we want to still coach a teacher. A teacher's doing a great job doesn't need coaching either because they're already doing a great job. So coaching in that way isn't going to help them. And so that's why people tune you out and say, can't stand having the feedback conversation with you and roll their eyes and do all the other things that we hate because we're giving them the wrong kind of feedback, right? Not everybody needs coaching. You don't have to walk in and, feel like you have to coach somebody or else you haven't given them feedback. There are all kinds of ways to give people feedback. And if you don't understand that, you'll default to the only way you were trained to do it without recognizing that not everybody needs that kind of feedback. And so that's why we're going to talk about these 4 feedback conversations, because once you understand them and you have them available to you, then you can seamlessly switch in between conversations depending on what the teacher needs at that moment. So that every single conversation, the teacher walks out and is like, wow, that's exactly what I needed. Thanks. And then when you go back to visit the classroom, you see growth, not because you coached it out of the teacher, but because you gave the teacher what they need for them to be able to grow. All right. So that's myth number 5. We've got 2 more. This one, myth number 6. If it's not written, it doesn't count. And so here are the bad habits it leads to. It means that every time we walk into a classroom, we feel like we have to leave something in writing. And you know what happens, right? As soon as you leave the classroom, the teacher's like, talk amongst yourselves. The teacher goes and grabs what you wrote and they're reading it, and it either destroys them or it makes them mad or, oh, good, I survived. I can keep doing what I'm already doing. And that writing is actually destroying or hurting what's happening in the classroom. You've made the classroom worse by leaving something in writing because now the teacher's distracted and they're not focused on the kids. Okay, all right, we're not going to leave in a classroom, but they'll get it within 24 hours. So you visit their classroom and within 24 hours, they get a write-up. And your write-up is you in the office writing up, and you know how things get misinterpreted. I mean, just the other day, I was talking to somebody. The administrator thought what they were writing was helpful and hopeful to the teacher. The teacher took it entirely different because there is a nuance that cannot be conveyed in writing. Now, listen, I'm all for writing things up, but some things need a conversation in addition to being written up. And we feel like, oh, if I just write it up, then they've gotten feedback. No, sometimes there's a conversation. Sometimes you don't have all the information you need. So what you put in writing isn't an accurate reflection of what happened in the classroom. But now it's in writing. It's now feels permanent. It's going up. Remember when people used to threaten us with, okay, well, if you're not careful, that's going to be a part of your permanent record. And so it feels permanent. And so when we put things in writing, it creates another layer to the feedback. Sometimes you don't need to put it in writing. Sometimes you need to walk down to that teacher's classroom after school and have a conversation, because in that conversation, you can pick up context. In that conversation, you can convey nuance. In that conversation, you can come together with a common understanding. And then after you've had that conversation, if you're required to put something in writing, then capture that conversation and put that in writing. Because now the teacher feels safe. Now the teacher doesn't feel like, oh, here they go. They're going to come in and who knows what they're going to write about me. And then waiting 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever your time limit is to then read this thing that they disagree with and then feel like they got to lawyer up and respond and write back, or they just dismiss it because it's so generic. It doesn't have any meaning or relevance to what I was doing in the classroom. And sometimes our writing can feel dismissive because the teacher was doing all of this, but you only have 160 characters in your program to really try to capture the nuance of what the teacher was doing in a classroom. So we often spend more time documenting our feedback than giving our feedback and delivering it in a way that lands. Teachers, we don't even know if it's going to land. We know we put it in writing. Did the teacher open the email? Did they skim it? Did they misinterpret it? We have no idea, right? We should be using written feedback strategically, not automatically. Oftentimes, a brief conversation is way more powerful than a long write-up. And then if you have the conversation, and again, if you're required to do a write-up afterwards, write it up then. But at that point, at least everybody is clear about the feedback itself, as opposed to leaving it open to misinterpretation and then assuming just because you wrote it means that the teacher got it. Doesn't work like that. All right, last myth. I saved the best one for last. And this is the one under which we all suffer, and it has generated some really bad habits. Okay, you ready for it? Da 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 da. The last myth, and probably the biggest myth that we have around feedback, is that giving feedback is the goal. You see, we treat feedback like a task that exists in and of itself, something to check off. The way we talk about it is that we're listing parts of our job. I have to do the master schedule. I have to give feedback. I have to deal with transportation issues. I have to sign contracts. And it's just in a list of tasks rather than understanding feedback the way builders understand feedback, which is that feedback is really about your vision, your mission, and your core values. You didn't think you were going to get through an episode without me talking about vision, did you? Your feedback is not about the person, even. Your feedback is about whether what is happening in that classroom is moving students towards the vision or away from the vision. The feedback is about saying, here's the vision and here's where you are. Now let's try to understand the gap, and then let's try to close the gap. If your feedback is not doing that, you are wasting your time. We keep thinking that the job is about giving teachers feedback. No, our job is to move our schools towards our vision, and feedback is one way to do that. Now, here's why this is so important, because I think so many of us have lost the plot of feedback. That's why, and here are the bad habits that we've created as a result of that. Every time we go in to give teachers feedback, it's a new conversation. It's not part of an ongoing conversation that we're having. It's new every single time. One time you go in and give them feedback and it's about this. The next time you go in, you see something different, so you give them feedback about that. The next time you go in, it's like we're starting from scratch every single time. There was a movie once, 50 First Dates, where every morning she woke up and she forgot what she did the day before. It's like she relived the same day over and over and over again. That's what our feedback is like. It's like 50 First Dates. Every time we have a feedback conversation, it's not a continuation of a conversation about how we are moving towards our vision. It starts from scratch based on whatever you happen to notice that time. And quite frankly, what you happen to notice from one time to the next is largely informed by whatever you were reading at the time, whatever training you went to last, whatever podcast episode you just finished. Oftentimes our lens is biased, right? So I can always tell, I always say this, I can always tell what training a district had before I got there. Because if everybody just had a workshop on student engagement, then every feedback problem in a classroom is about engagement. If you just had a workshop on rigor, every feedback problem is about rigor. If you just read a great article on supporting struggling students, every feedback you're going to give is about supporting struggling students. It happens. It's the way we were built. If your feedback is out of context, then your lens is influenced not by your vision, mission, and core values. Your lens is influenced by whatever you happen to have consumed last. You can't trust your lens. You can't even trust your instrument, because your instrument is open to interpretation, and your instrument is a reflection of somebody else's lens. You may have an evaluation instrument that has 27 domains and 58 subdomains. And then somebody in your district office said, that's too much. Let's make it easier. These are the 5 district things that we want to pick. How were those 5 things picked? You have no idea. And if I'm being really honest, they probably don't either. Just the 5 things they feel are most important based on whatever they consume, like whatever training they went to. And so even your instrument does not provide you with a reliable lens through which to look at somebody's practice. The only lens that you can rely on is your vision, your mission, and your core values. And if you see feedback as a way to say, here's our vision, here's what's happening in your classroom, let's understand the gap between where you are and the vision, and then let me give you some feedback to help you close the gap. If feedback is treated any differently than that, then it's random. It's based on your preferences, not based on your priorities. It's based on compliance, not based on completion of your vision. I'm on a roll today. Look at that. That just came. So here's where we make the mistake. Feedback is not a standalone thing. Feedback is one of the tools that you're using as a builder to build your vision. It is located in a bigger context for how we get everybody committed to and working steadily towards the bigger vision. If your feedback is not contextualized in your vision, it's random. I'm going through all of these myths, but at the root of all of these myths is this one, that feedback is a goal in and of itself. It's not. The goal is your vision. Feedback is the way you get to the vision. And the sooner you understand that, the better your feedback becomes. So let me do a recap now of the myths. Myth number 1, starting with a compliment, giving people a compliment. You got to give them a compliment as well as the bad news. What you're doing is you're treating the grow as a bad thing. And you're giving it equal weight with the random compliment you just pulled out of a box because you felt like you had to give a compliment. Myth number 2, you got to ask reflective questions and help them come to conclusions on themselves. If somebody's drowning, you don't hand them a mirror, you give them a life raft. Myth number 3, you need to get in X number of classrooms a week. You're focusing on the volume of feedback versus the quality of the feedback. It's not how many classrooms you get in every week. It's what classrooms need you. And are you getting into those classrooms every week that matter? Myth number 4, you got to follow the script. You say the right thing and you'll avoid conflict. There is no script. There are frameworks, yes, but following a script puts you in a position of just doing a script read with the teacher, because the teacher has if you've got a script, so does the teacher. When you have a framework, it gives that structure, gives you freedom to be who you need to be in that moment to be able to support the teacher. All right. Myth number 5, all feedback should be coaching. Nope. You need to differentiate your feedback. You need to give people the feedback they need. Not everybody needs coaching. The worst thing you can do is give them coaching. You turn things off in their heads when you start coaching a person who isn't ready for coaching or who doesn't need coaching, right? So feedback is feedback. Coaching may be a kind of feedback, but feedback is feedback. Myth number 6, if it's not written, it doesn't count. Listen, there is no substitution for the one-on-one exchange that happens during feedback. So be careful about writing, because writing can miss nuance, it can be misinterpreted, and there are times when nothing but a conversation will do. And then myth number 7, giving feedback is not the goal. The goal is your vision. Now, if you find yourself believing or acting out of these myths, if you find that you have developed some feedback habits based on these myths, you're not alone. We all have been taught these myths. These are myths that are common. They're pervasive. We've all been taught them. And as leaders, these myths have helped us create leadership habits that make our feedback less effective, that make our feedback result in pushback and hurt feelings and blank stares. But you're a builder now. And part of being a builder is dismantling the myths that have been holding you back, that have kept your practice trapped into this feedback dance that doesn't serve anybody, that's turned feedback, which is a valuable tool, into this big juggernaut of a compliance thing that's just is all this albatross that we're carrying around our necks. I got to get into these classrooms. I got to get these write-ups. I got to observe these teachers. And we've turned feedback into an exercise in compliance rather than a powerful tool that moves us towards our vision. So as a builder, it's time to shed these myths because they're holding you back. It's not your fault. I mean, you were taught them, but now you know. And when you know better, you do better. You don't have to be a victim of these myths. There is another way of looking at feedback. So you were taught that's the only way. No, there's another better way, more powerful way to look at feedback, where you can see results, where you can treat your teachers like peers and professionals and partners rather than treating them like they're broken, where you can actually see tangible growth in teachers because you're giving them feedback that they can use. So you have a choice now. Now that you know better, do you continue to buy into these myths? Or do you just choose to break these myths and give teachers the feedback they deserve because you're getting rid of the habits, these bad feedback habits that are destroying our trust and our relationship with our teachers and creating more work for us? And we've now chosen to start giving feedback like a builder. I'll talk to you next time. Hey, if you're ready to get started being a builder right away, then I want to invite you to join us at Buildership University. It's our exclusive online community for builders just like you, where you'll be able to get the exact training that you need to turn your school into a success story right now with the people and resources you already have. Inside, you'll find our best online courses, live trainings with me, tons of resources, templates, and exemplars, and monthly live office hours with me where you can ask me anything and get my help on whatever challenge you're facing right now. If you're tired of hitting obstacle after obstacle and you're sick of tiny little incremental gains each year, if you're ready to make a dramatic difference in your school right now, then you need to join Buildership University. Just go to buildershipuniversity.com and get started writing your school success story today.